Any objections? All right. Thank you. So we may share this discussion with others who share an interest in this topic. So welcome everyone. Welcome back to most of you. I'm Andy, and this is Examined Lives. Once again, this is a forum for exploring fascinating phenomena in a very special way. I'll say a little bit more about that way in a second. Our topic today is evolutionary mismatch, otherwise known as the square peg in the round hole phenomenon, the Darwinian square peg in the round hole. So quick reminder, I like to urge us to use what I call the mosaic method, which means we want to assemble many bright, colorful observations into a picture no one of us could have assembled by ourselves. And that means each and every one of us needs to be brief, treat everyone else's attention as precious. I find as a matter of practice that when I give interesting conversations my full attention, I get an order of magnitude more value from it. So I urge you to follow that practice as well. And I think this can be an extremely rewarding group for you if you do that. And finally, our shared goal is to build a deeper understanding of the phenomenon. So try to build on the observations of others. I'll say a few things about the topic, and I know only enough about it just to be dangerous, but I understand there's others here who can help us develop that understanding. So a creature's traits make it more or less well adapted to its environment. And traits that are a good fit for, if its traits are a good fit for its environment, we say it has high fitness. And if it's a poor fit, we say it has low fitness. And I assume that mathematicians have ways of expressing fitness mathematically. I initially thought, oh, this must be a number that ranges between 0 and 1, 0 being 0 chance of passing on your genes and 1 being 100% chance of passing on your genes. But I just realized a couple of minutes before the thing that there's also the matter of how many copies of your genes you pass on. So perhaps perfect fitness involves being able to pass on multitudes of your genes to future generations. In any case, the way I think we should begin exploring this is with concrete examples of the phenomenon. So I'll give a couple and then invite you guys to share some of your favorite examples of evolutionary mismatch. Once we have a number of examples on the table, I'd like to lead us in a more philosophical direction to contemplate what we can learn from the phenomenon about how we can build a better world. So I'm going to botch the pronunciation, but 66 million years ago or so, a meteor called the Chicxulub meteor slammed down near the Yucatan Peninsula, I believe, and splashed up so much dirt and dust into the atmosphere that radically changed the atmosphere and led to the extinction of the dinosaurs. So the traits that led dinosaurs to be so successful for so long and that made them so well adapted to the environment just before the meteor hit, quite suddenly became maladaptive in the environment created after the meteor strike. I understand that biologists have discovered that baby sea turtles orient their quest for the ocean. You know how they hatch from eggs on the beach, right? And then head towards the ocean. Apparently they gauge their direction by looking for light glinting off the waves. And when human beings build lighted buildings in the other direction, the baby sea turtles get confused, head off in the wrong direction, and often perish before they can find their way to the ocean. So an evolutionary algorithm that served them well before humans invented artificial light forms is now serving them poorly in the environment we've built. Here's a fun example for you. I understand there's a creature called the giant jewel beetle, and the discarded beer bottles actually trigger the male jewel beetle's reproductive instincts. And the giant jewel beetles will mount beer bottles and mate and try to mate with them with a strategy that has very little success of passing on genes to future generations. All right, let's, I want to hear from some of you guys. Who would like to share an example of evolutionary mismatch for a collective consideration? Looks like Rob is ready to go. Rob?
Yeah, I just wanted to do my favorite, which is the golden frog in the Monteverde cloud forest in Costa Rica, which was first discovered in 1966, I think, and was extinct about 20 years later, was declared extinct in 2005. The golden frog mostly lived underground. It would come up for 2 weeks in April, May, at the end of the rainy season to mate. Otherwise, it stayed underground. And climate change reduced the amount of mist in the cloud forest. And the golden frog had a very thin skin. And because there was no mist to protect it, the skin dried out and killed them. So they became extinct. Although the Rainforest Alliance, or whatever the group is, claims that it was the fungus that's killing all the amphibians. So we have two different ideas about it, but this book claims the thin skin. So thin-skinned frogs, quite a beautiful little creature too.
Interesting. Thank you, Rob. By the way, Sage has just raised his electronic hand, which is a nice way to signal your interest in sharing something. So Sage.
Sure. I wanted to add two examples. One is the one that I think is perhaps most compelling, and it is basically diet and exercise, but sugar and things like that are obviously mismatched. But the true extent of that mismatch and its negative effects has been called the diseases of civilization. So we kind of take it as just a simple truth that in old age, chronic diseases increase greatly, and just basically overall physical well-being becomes very difficult. But there's some good work out there basically showing that a lifetime of eating high, sugar and carb diet, and especially combined with low exercise, when we're younger, it doesn't matter as much because we're more resilient. But over time, these things catch up to us. And really what should be happening is around like 65 or so, you should be plateauing in your health and actually just kind of remain stable. And we observe this in many people. They last 20, 25 years and they just, have a pretty stable composition. They don't get these onset chronic diseases. So I think it's helpful it's a helpful lens to think what we think we know about ourselves and how much of that actually might be due to mismatch.
Interesting. Did you say you had two examples?
Oh yeah, and I just wanted to throw in an alternative. It's not all negative. There's been interesting uses of what they call ecological traps. So that would be like the beetle you mentioned, but we can actually use those traps for conservation, for good, to lure out invasive species, to bring species we want into a better habitat that we've prepared. So the mechanism can be negative, but the relationship between organisms, adaptiveness, and the environment can be harnessed in many ways.
Nice. Thank you, Sage. David.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of state the obvious. I think everybody's aware of this, but I don't know where it would take us in the conversation. But, you have these evolutionary mismatches, not just over time, but over space. And, invasive species were just mentioned. Invasive species are in real time evolutionary mismatches. And very likely, a lot of those don't work out because of evolutionary mismatches. We kind of overlook those because we just see the problematic ones. You name it, zebra mussels, lionfish in Western Hemisphere. And it's, there are obviously many examples of invasive species. And the ones that are most problematic is the understanding, the basic understandings. We're talking about an evolutionary mismatch there. And that's, benefiting. We're most of these examples we've been discussing so far, are evolutionary mismatches leading to, negative results on survival, reproduction, circumstances, that sort of thing for health. So
And
just
when
wanted
an
to add that
invasive
to the mix.
species, when an invasive species like the zebra mussels proliferates wildly, it's doing very well, but often at the expense of other creatures that thrived in the environment, thereby invaded. Good.
Absolutely, sure.
Thank you. Steve.
I would think that there is an evolutionary mismatch between what we evolved for and modern politics. Under ancestral conditions, there were no large scale groups, no complex and complicated politics the way we have now. So I think we're shaped to rely on gut feelings and an instinctive distrust of others, which is, in my opinion, fairly disastrous impulse in the modern world. And I would add to that anonymity. In the EEA, there was not much anonymity. Everybody knew you and you knew them. And that's certainly not the case in the modern world. Relationships are often not permanent, and there's a lot of anonymity. And I'm not sure that's been a boon to our political life as well.
Nice example. Kathleen?
Following up on that, it's an interesting question because conflict of interest is inherent to human existence. And what might be a mismatch for us might be really good for psychopathic dispositions. And that's a scary thing, because if you want us to all care about something like, a society that respects equal rights, there are people who don't care. And in a previous environment, we might have been able to take down those bullies, and now we can't.
And I'm thinking that social media and the internet are key changes to the environment there that allow some psychopathic individuals to thrive in ways that might have been difficult before. Thank you, Kathleen. Rob, I do see your hand up, but I'm going to give David and Hank a shot here first.
Yeah, so just piggybacking off of what Steve was saying, I think he's really getting at this concept of social mismatch. And Steve was getting at it from the sort of the top down. What happens when you go beyond Dunbar's 150 people of face-to-face relationships that humans can computationally handle? So that's where political tribalism runs amok. The inverse of that is when we are socially isolated and we're not connected with our own physical face-to-face networks. There's a host of things that can go wrong. The science is resounding, demonstrating that wellness and the strength and connectivity of your social network are highly, highly correlated. Even as much as saying it's about as close in terms of poor outcomes for wellness as obesity, and in some measures even. So it's the social mismatch component is truly profound.
And I'm hearing David point to an interesting aspect. So the Dunbar number is that the scientists think that we're evolved for environments of about 150 tribesmen.
Yeah, well, a tribe would be more, actually a tribe is the evolutionary innovation for us to handle trust with strangers. So this is more the band and camp. A camp is about 25 to 30 individuals. This is your average hunter-gatherer group. And it's sort of the incest hedge, where you have multiple camps that then trade mating partners. The reason why they think it's 150 is because the band level is about 150, and that's the max number our brains have been able to compute in terms of the face-to-face ledger of record of previous interactions with other human beings.
Fascinating. And I'm also hearing you point out that being underconnected, having fewer connections than is healthy is one way to be mismatched, but that being overconnected, I think this goes back to Steve's point, could also create strange mismatch effects.
Yeah, it's like there's a sweet spot, right? We need to figure out how to do that on a societal.
Nice. Hank.
Hi. Oh, you can hear me. Nice to see everybody. I was thinking about, as I become familiar with this evolutionary mismatch and how I think about it when I do psychotherapy a little bit. So, but one thing I wanted to go back to misogyny. Now, how does the ancient, the small packs, the 25, 30 individuals, and the male's role in, from way back, what's the hunter-gatherer's role is to hunt, protect the group, make sure he has his females so they can conceive, so they can pass on the genes. But it seems like that then may not have been misogyny. It may not have, it was just the way the early settlers, let's call them, operated. But now it's sort of what's grown out of that is this mismatch where we can call it misogyny. And I didn't think it out. I just wanted to bring it up to make sure I didn't forget it, but it's not well organized, but there it is. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's worth thinking about misogyny through this lens, I think. Got several hands up here. Rob, I promised you a shot. Russell, and Steve, I see you.
Thank you. It's shoot, by the way. The question of the social mismatch issue, I think, is as the most important problem that we confront in thinking about these evolutionary issues. And just 2 points about it. Number one is, Nicholas Christakis argues in his book that the real issue here is that people can organize larger groups in ways that mesh with evolutionary evolved predispositions for social cohesion and support at a group level, or they can do something different. And if you mismatch things, things fall apart. If you get it right, your group, your larger group, your society functions better. And so, one can ask the question, well, okay, look at politics today. Things are not working so well. Is that, exactly the point? That you violate these predispositions and things start working. The second point is just a question that I would like to pose to this group. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut out early because of another commitment. So I hope somebody can answer this question fast. But has anyone read the just released new book, The Dawn of Everything, by David Graeber and David Wengrow? Because the point there you go. Yeah, me too. I'm only in the first chapter, but the point, the central argument of that book is that in fact there were other societies that developed before the things took off in Mesopotamia and so on, that did expand to much greater size, city type organizations with more egalitarian and supportive social patterns, and did not require, a mismatch to grow in size.
Gotcha. Yeah, this is a nice reminder that the mere fact that we evolved to live in relatively small bands doesn't mean that large societies have to be dysfunctional, because the right cultural interventions, the right learning, the right learned dispositions could mitigate that to a high degree. Thank you, Russell. Rob Swigert.
Thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about the mismatch geographically in space. The book of Mismatch ends on an account of a guy who lived in the Himalayas at about 4,000 meters. And there's a real problem in Tibet with iodine deficiency. And he had a couple of sons, both very severely disabled by cerebral palsy and cretinism. And he became a Sherpa and started bringing back home food from modern foods from the climbers that he was helping. And his third son was born, and he was fine because he was getting food that had iodine in it. So there's a kind of positive reversal of the mismatch, because the geographical mismatch of living in a high altitude with a shortage of iodine was counteracted by this exchange of products.
Yeah, interesting.
So I found that particular story really fascinating, because it contains both the negative and the positive in it.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Guys, I try to the extent I can, observe the same order in which people expressed an interest to talk, but I'm also going to let people who haven't spoken yet jump the line in cases. So, Diane, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I want to go back to what Russell was talking about, or rather, I want to say that he made me articulate something in my own mind, which is that we started out with examples of animals whose, or plants or whatever, whose environment has changed, and so they no longer fit. But all the examples we've given of human mismatch actually result from human action. In other words, we have put ourselves in a situation where we're not fitting whatever it was we were evolved to do. And so maybe not in this meeting because it's too huge a question, but we really need to be thinking about what we have done that's not working.
Yeah, that's a beautiful point, Diane. I mean, we really seem to be, we talk about the Anthropocene and anthropogenesis of a new environment. We seem to be pulling the rug out from under ourselves and making sustainability extremely difficult. And perhaps the concept of evolutionary mismatch and its opposite, would that be evolutionary match, can help guide us back in a more sustainable direction. Thank you, Diane. Steve?
Just two quick comments. One, another take on what Diane just said that's a little more optimistic is that unlike animals, we also have the capability of changing our environment to better suit us. But the main comment I wanted to make was to go back to what David said right after my earlier comment about the other side of the large scale was social alienation on a smaller scale when we're disconnected from a social group. I was talking with someone the other day about the research in happiness, which finds, at least in Western industrialized democracies, the U-curve relationship, so that the nadir of happiness is typically during the childbearing years. And some of you who are parents may intuitively understand why that might be the case. But a person I was talking with said, I wonder if that's true in hunter-gatherer societies. And I don't know what the anthropological research on it is, but my hypothesis would be that it's not. And the reason that it might not be is because of what David was hinting at, which is that like Hillary Clinton said, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, you had a village helping you in the ancestral environment. And due to lots of aspects of the modern world, many parents are pretty alone with all of the stresses of raising their children. My children and grandchildren all live in the same town I do, and I can tell you their life is easier with grandpa and grandma around than it was for my wife and I raising 3 kids when no relatives were within 2,000 miles of us. Yeah. So there is I think that's an important mismatch between what we are shaped to do as parents and child rearing in the modern world.
It's interesting to reflect how many forms of evolutionary mismatch manifest in our minds as unhappiness or as stress, for example. My guess is that almost all of the top causes of stress can be traced back to a mismatch of one kind or another. cultural, if not biological. Sage?
Also, I often have a bit of, I think mismatch is a kind of stylized term, because in the end, what is it really? It's just very strong selection pressure. All environments change, organisms adapt. When we call something evolutionary mismatch, we kind of have just said the environment has changed so much that this organism in its current form cannot adapt on the margins. It would have to totally transform. It may perish. On the other hand, I think it's worth highlighting that because environmental change is at the backdrop of everything, and there are cases, especially random storms, random events that would be considered evolutionary mismatch, but then 20 years later are not. Niche construction is an important term to kind of keep in mind in that, and plasticity, which are related, but organisms themselves can also create the environment that they are adapted for. So it's a two-directional process, and plasticity is sort of an innate version of adapting to that. But taking it further, thinking of a beaver goes into a forest, it creates a beaverated forest, it floods the forest, all the trees die. It can last for generations. So that in that moment, it was not in a great spot, and it just created the spot it needed. Even if water was low, they could find a way. So it's not, we have to keep in mind that it is two-directional.
Nice.
Actually.
Thank you. I'm going to wax perhaps dangerously romantic and irrational here, but any of you guys fans of Lord of the Rings movie franchise? Think if you will, to when the intrepid fellowship makes it to the Rivendell, a world where the elves seem to live in beautiful harmony with their natural environment. Now, again, this is fiction, and it's romantic fiction, but it does seem to me, I get the feel that the elves found a way to coexist with a mature ecosystem that had achieved a level of stability, such that it wasn't changing so rapidly that creatures were being, having the rug pulled out from under them. Is that help at all as a mental image of what we might be striving towards? I mean, I'm just trying to operationalize this concept of mismatch into ways we can improve the human condition. I don't know, man. I guess I'm reaching for fiction here for a way to get a handle on that. No need to respond directly, but Hank? Still muted, Hank. Got to unmute. No. Tell you what, Hank, it looks like you're having technical difficulties. I'm going to go to Rob until you figure out your mute situation. Rob?
Yeah, I hate to shamelessly plug, but I did a book about this very subject, and I just want to flash the cover. I've been obsessed with this whole project, which is basically about the adoption of agriculture and how that changed our environment faster than we could evolve to keep up with it. So all of this stuff is totally appropriate for, although this is largely fiction, it's based on a lot of research.
Hey, Rob, share again the title and subtitle of your book.
Sorry, it's called Mixed Harvest: Stories from the Human Past. It's published by Bear Gun, which is mostly an anthropological press.
And it's about agriculture being a two-edged.
Well, it's basically a story of mankind through what I thought of as the three phases, because I was involved with a bunch of research at Çatalhöyük in Turkey and a Neolithic site, which was very compressed, an agglomeration of very small, cramped buildings that were basically underground. They had roof entrances like a Hopi village. And I thought that's the weirdest place I'd ever seen the first time I went there in 1999. And I couldn't understand why people would actually choose to live in this dark, smoky environment when they were surrounded by the natural world. But that was the beginning of the transition to agriculture, where the diet changed, our sexual relationships changed, our attitude towards the natural world was beginning to change as we began to domesticate our gods. And we also started to create a linear world, what I call the hegemony of the straight line.
Thank you for highlighting that for us. I think some of us are going to want to check that out. Hank, if you found your unmute button, I can come back to you.
Yeah, hold it. Oh, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, good. It came back. I just want to see if I can't speak well today, so bear with me. Can we conclude in evolutionary mismatch, including sort of cultural change and evolutionary mismatch?
That's a wonderful question. I think I want to express, if not the same, then a related question in another way. How do we apply the concept of mismatch to cultural evolution? And does it shed any light on how we can be more mindful about shaping a world where our children and grandchildren are less mismatched, better matched? It sounds like David has something to share on that front.
Well, this is just to everyone's point, and Sage's point about humans being uniquely situated to be able to.
David, your volume level just plunged. I'm not sure why. Can you speak?
Can you hear me now?
It's better. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, just to the topic of humans being uniquely placed to be able to enact our own niche construction. I think the key here is that unless we know how we evolved, we're not going to be able to effectively do that. So a precondition to getting out of mismatch is literally understanding our evolutionary history. And I think that's the strongest arguments for evolutionary science that we have, is to increase wellness.
That makes a lot of sense to me, which makes the work of, I think, several members of our group here really important to humanity's future. We've got David, Rob, I think others working in this area. Kathleen, will you jump in?
That made me think how important it is for differently situated people to participate in determining how we evolved, because there are these biases, and otherwise it becomes the naturalistic fallacy where things are justified, like masculine domination or racism. So we evolved to have biases, which are actually adaptive very often. So that's really important to have different perspectives on that.
Yep. And it seems to me that when you're trying to understand the evolution of ecosystems and the devolution of ecosystems, we're talking about systems that are so enormously complex that no one person could possibly understand the dynamics well enough to make wise decisions, to consistently make wise decisions about how to intervene or tweak it, which means multiple perspectives and multiple minds on the problem. We put it this way. So suppose we decided to mount an environmental intervention to stop a zebra mussel invasion. And maybe we do that, but we simultaneously disadvantage half a dozen other species in the process. The web of interconnections is often so rich that that's not the least bit implausible. In fact, many attempts to kind of stabilize declining ecosystems have unintended consequences. And of course, many of the problems with the Anthropocene, this human-centered world we've built, is that our many interventions that did improve human comfort and well-being have unintended consequences on the planet's capacity to sustain us. Well, do we throw up our hands and just cease trying to stabilize our ecosystem because out of fear of the unintended consequences of our action? Or do we try to pool our respective understandings and try to intervene in ways that are as mindful and conscious as possible. It seems to me the latter is the wiser course. Diane?
Yes, the idea of unintended consequences, though, I think also it applies not just to the environment, which we have done a terrible job with, but to the consequences for ourselves. In other words, we may do things or create institutions that serve some of our own needs that at the same time frustrate others.
That's right. We each and every one of us has multiple ends or goals, and often, in fact, even within our own lives, we individually choose to favor some goals and inadvertently compromise our progress towards others. Interesting. Kathleen and Hank, you both have hands up, but I'm going to go with Alan here because his hand just went up for the first time. Alan Hayes.
I find that one of the problems is that we're mismatched to the environment that we ourselves have created. You will be aware of Fermi's paradox that when a culture develops the abilities that we have, it's pretty likely that it will wipe itself out in one way or another. Which means that we've got to be very much aware of the development of our culture and to take on the responsibility of only choosing the goals that are going to fit in the long term. And we're definitely not that. And the other is the sheer complication. I'm more and more aware that I find so many things interesting that I don't concentrate enough on one of them in order to do something about it. And I think that plus commercial pressures is going to be a big problem. How do we change our educational system so that we do, in fact, deal with the environment that we now have, recognizing the dangers?
You speak eloquently, Alan. Thank you. Mike.
Yeah, coming in from work here. One of the big problems I've been concerned about is the idea that we used to have cravings for things that were very rare and hard to get, but now are available in unlimited and concentrated forms. You know, sugar and fat are perfect examples of that we all know about. I will go and say sexual arousal is another problem. It used to be fairly controlled, but now we have it unlimited and concentrated form on the net. And if you talk to some psychologists, they will tell you there's a big problem with this that is hidden below the surface. And another area that I'm particularly concerned about now is the idea that in tribal societies thousands of years ago, the idea of anger and outrage occasionally popping up to deal with the occasional social transgression may have been a useful thing to do. But now we have it available in unlimited and concentrated forms of anger and outrage. And I think it's actually causing quite a big addiction problem in our society. We just haven't come to grips with.
I think there's even something called grievance addiction that psychologists say is a real thing, that your mind can become so used to feeling aggrieved and outraged that you go out in search of new things to be outraged about, to sustain the high, if one may call it that. And yeah, that does seem to be a huge problem. Thank you, Mike. Hank, you have something else?
Yeah. I hope I'm,
Yeah, we can hear you. We could a minute ago. I think you just turned yourself off.
Hello? No? I'm there? I can't tell. Okay. I was thinking on a very micro level, and I've only given this some peripheral thought about.
Are others losing?
Every
So Hank, lean close. Hank, lean close to the mic, if you would.
When you work psychotherapy, that's called a
We're
me
getting
look
an
this way.
inconsistent feed.
How's this?
Try that. Give that a shot, Hank. No, sorry. Okay. Well, thanks for trying, Hank. Trying to get my head around the concept of evolutionary mismatch in kind of something like in a way that might bring a little more clarity to my own thinking. It seems to me that creatures are bundles of traits. And if each trait represents like one dimension in a multidimensional space, then the creature is defined by its position in that, like a point position in that multidimensional space. Meanwhile, environments have many features. Hang on, Rob. And meanwhile, environments have many features. And each feature of an environment can be represented as a dimension in another tremendously multidimensional space. So for any one creature in one environment, you can assign it one position in trait space and another position in its environment space. And those can be either, and the traits can be well suited to navigating and succeeding in that environment or poorly so. And the challenge of creating better match involves moving either the one or the other, either moving the trait set to better fit with the environment that exists, or changing the environment to better meet the trait set that exists. And right now, biological evolution is far too slow, essentially ruling out one of those two, although genetic engineering or something might change that. So we're really talking here about, if we're talking about the practical implications of this discussion, what we're really talking about is how do we modify our environment for greater match, where better match often translates into more happiness, less stress, and things like that. Does that make any sense at all? The multidimensionality of the space, of the two spaces, I think, is a real complexity, because you try to move something along one dimension in one of those two spaces, and you'll often move along other dimensions, and with unintended consequences. Okay, David.
I think if I'm tracking you right, Andy, I think a good example of this would be from my field, circadian rhythm disorder. So this is what clinicians say is when an individual's circadian rhythm does not match the expected time of performance throughout the 24-hour period. And what this fails to do, and what a lot of clinicians fail to do if they don't understand evolutionary mismatch, is to problematize this and call it a disorder. But in fact, there's strong evidence to suggest that from the work that I've done working with hunter-gatherers, that in fact, this property of a large range of variation in circadian rhythms was likely adaptive, providing a sentinelized environment where at night there were some people awake while other people were asleep and vulnerable. And so the implications of this are really widespread.
Yeah, and far-reaching. It occurs to me that what we label ADHD, attention deficit disorder, might very well have been adaptive. That the kind of attentional habits of what we classify as a disorder could well have been adaptive in ancestral environments. And my guess is our ancestors needed people who could focus very narrowly on some problems, while others had a more holistic awareness to keep to sentinelize, if I may use your term. So it's not clear to me that the whole concept of attention deficit disorder is a proper concept. It's better thought of as a mismatch between the attentional habits people are born with and the demands of the cultural environment that they find themselves in, say the school environment or the work environment that they find themselves in.
Yeah, and just to piggyback real quick, it can cause more harm than good. With insomnia, in fact, one of the best ways to get around insomnia is to explain the evolutionary etiology, because of course, all insomnia is hypervigilance. And you can imagine, being a hunter-gatherer in a very dangerous dynamic environment, hypervigilance would have had some sort of relevancy. When you explain to them that it's not necessarily that you have a disorder, but in fact, there was value to this in previous ancestral conditions, often the symptoms actually reside. So we just need to figure this out and communicate this stuff better.
Just saying, hey, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just, but guess what? You're okay, so you can relax. You don't need to be so vigilant all the time. Fascinating. I love it. Steve?
Just to piggyback on what David and Andy were just saying, this really makes me think of the work of Randolph Nesse, Nesse, who is sort of the father of evolutionary medicine. And I believe he directs an Institute of Evolutionary Medicine at Arizona State, I believe. And he's also now moved into the newer field of evolutionary psychiatry. His latest book is called Good Reasons for Bad Feelings, which is written for the general public. It's a great book. But he was on one of these Examine Lives a number of months ago. He showed up for one of these. But this whole idea that you were expressing, David, I think is central to Nesse's, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, to his approach to both psychopathology and psychiatry and physical disorders in medicine.
Thanks, Steve. Rob?
Just thought I'd mention Robert Sapolsky's work. He wrote a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And he talks about the, I guess, the cortical response when there's danger. The zebra will run until he gets away or gets eaten. And then the things subside. But people who have a mortgage to worry about every month are under constant stress. So there's a big mismatch with our created environment. And I think most, whoever said it before, I think maybe Diane, that most of the things that we're talking about with mismatch are human created. And I think it's really important that we remember that we're having an impact. And I'm hearing unintended consequences, which is absolutely what we're dealing with.
The idea that modern culture stresses us continually or in ways that cause ulcers and other adverse health outcomes reminds me that Buddhism and mindfulness practices going back thousands and thousands of years have said that have taught that you can train your mind to be less reactive, less hypervigilant, less worried and stressed. And so you might think that we have to completely overhaul human civilization to solve this problem, but here's this technology of mindfulness meditation that has that millions and millions of people have found can reduce stress, reduce ulceration rates, and so on, simply by changing the habits of mind that translate environmental stressors into unnecessary worry and mental churning. So there are low-cost solutions to some of these issues. Borislav?
Thank you for the opportunity. Because you're speaking about the, let's say, some kind of disorder, I would like to mention about the normal personality trait that in the modern environment might be dysfunctional, which is a real problem. Let's say it's not about the personality disorders, it's about the normal personality trait. I will give you an example here. When it comes to with neuroticism, for example, it is defined as zero proclivity to experience negative emotions. I'm in the business of selection people for the corporate world, and I might assure you that they're in constant search of people that are high on emotional stability scale. Okay, but as you know, many of the people are below the 50th percentile, which is a real problem.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. I am going to ask us to address the topic of picking a topic for next month. So if you'll, perhaps you'll want to start here, please mark down December 16th. Same bat time, same bat channel, 12 noon Eastern. I think it's Thursday, December 16th. I hope we'll meet again then, and we will unless something comes up. But I have a few topics that I can throw out, but I'm also happy to take a topic suggestion or two from the floor if anybody has something that they'd especially like to have us address. Steve.
It just popped in my head because we were just talking about it, but evolutionary medicine / evolutionary psychiatry, that's pretty broad, but that might be an interesting topic.
How about we go with evolutionary psychiatry just to narrow it a bit?
Okay.
Does that sound all right? And if we go that route, do you think you could play a role in giving us a little summary of it to get us started?
Or I could find some articles or YouTube talk. There's a great YouTube talk by Ness I've seen that summarizes the ideas in his book.
Perfect. A couple of links and maybe coach me up so I can write it up properly.
All right, this will teach me to suggest a topic again.
Yeah, right. Watch out, everybody. Evolutionary psychiatry is topic number one. Let me walk through all of them and then we'll have a vote. Topic number two, human progress. What is progress? How do you recognize it? Is progress real? Topic three, why do we love stories? And I'll give you one more here. Status and recognition. Why do we crave it? Are these healthy cravings? And if not, what do we do about it? All right, so evolutionary psychiatry, I'm sorry, I want to, progress, stories, or status and recognition. So we're going to do approval voting, which means vote for as many as you like. Please raise your hand in the participation by using the reactions button at the bottom. Fair enough. Everybody know the drill? All right. All those in favor of discussing evolutionary psychiatry next time, please register your vote. Okay, thank you. Hands down. Topic number two, who would like to discuss human progress? Okay, thank you. Topic number three, why do we love stories? One seems to have struck a chord. Okay, thank you all. And finally, hands down, status and recognition. Oh, we've got oh my goodness, a dark horse. Okay. It looks like status and recognition overwhelmed our love of stories. So just that speaks to human nature, I think. I'm looking forward to a good one, and I certainly think we could come back to stories. Those of you who liked that topic.
Right, linked to status.
It relates too, doesn't it? We could probably tie in stories on this one. Excellent. Well, I think status and recognition would be great. I look forward to learning a little bit more about evolutionary psychiatry on my own time, and maybe Steve and I can repackage that topic in a way that seduces more of you. So, all right, guys, I've had a blast. I think you guys really brought brought your A game this time, and I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Hope to see you all December 16th. Bring a friend.
Bye.